Hey everyone, it's Jennifer and thanks for stopping by again. Earlier this summer I mentioned that I would occasionally be having guests on my YouTube channel and on my blog, just guest artists that I think are just so fantastic that I just have to share them with you. Today is another one and it's Dawn Woleslagle. She is an incredible artist and today she's going to show you how to enhance solid stamping with Copic markers. But before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Dawn. Dawn is the owner of W+9, which is one of my favorite stamp companies. I use their stamps all the time. Dawn is an incredible, true artist. She is fantastic with watercolor. She's fantastic with Copics. She's amazing with distress inks and distress markers. And what makes Dawn even more impressive is that her videos are incredibly well done. I think she's the best crafty YouTuber out there. They're very approachable even when it's a complicated technique, and it makes you feel like you can do it and just dive right in and try. I'm scrolling through a few of Dawn's masterpieces here. You can see that they're all absolutely beautiful. I will link to Dawn's YouTube channel here and in my YouTube description below and over on my blog. She has got a big heart too, which makes it even better, so I'm really excited that she is here today to share with you what is a fantastic technique. And so now, without any more delay, I introduce Dawn.
Hey guys, it's Dawn Woleslagle and I'm filling in for Jennifer today. I hope you don't mind. Jennifer is the queen of techniques. So when she asked me to fill in for her, I knew I had to do something technique driven and I hope I do her justice. So I'm going to be showing you guys how to use the W+9 Pure Color dye inks with your Copic markers. Now I'm going to show you two ways to do this, but we're going to start with the more detailed or more difficult version first. I'm one of those who likes to start with the hard stuff first because everything after that's just easier, right? Now to create the roses, we'll be using W+9's Coming Up Roses and the Spring Bloom stamp sets. I'm stamping out the roses in Bloomsbury dye ink and the leaves in the Mojito dye ink. The formula of these inks works beautifully with Copic markers. You can blend colors together and you can even use the colorless blender to lift color out like I'm going to show you today. And if you're unfamiliar with this formula, it's also one of those that as it absorbs and dries into the paper, it evens out. So it may look splotchy at first, but it dries to a nice, even, smooth coverage. Now that we've got our design stamped out, we can come in with the colorless blender and we're going to start pulling out some color. Now I'm going to bear in mind the general shape of a rose when I'm doing this. If you look at a rose from the top, the petals kind of form a spiral the way they curl around each other. So I'm going to start in the middle and then I'm just going to start kind of scribbling out in a spiral motion. And I'm literally just scribbling, you can see there, but I am going in that spiral motion. Now everywhere that I run the Copic marker over this stamped area, it's going to start lifting out color. And in some areas I'm going thicker and in some areas I'm going thinner, so I get a variation. I'm not pulling all the color. And what this is going to do is it's going to create these natural looking highlights and shadows. And we're going to use those when we come in and stamp our detail layer on top. Now, it may look like a hot mess right now, and that is perfectly fine. All we're doing is getting that variation in color going. And then I've just done the exact same thing to the smaller two roses. Now you can already start to see that these are looking like flowers. Now these are still wet with that blender solution. So I want to let that dry because we're going to be adding a detailed stamp on top of this, and because our ink reacts with that blender solution, it will react if it's still wet and I won't get quite the vibrancy that I'm looking for. So I'm going to let this dry, and while I wait for that to dry, I'm just going to use a YG03 Copic marker to add in some stems and connect some of these leaves. Once I've connected all the leaves, I can come in with the detail image of the rose. And I'm going to be stamping that in the exact same Bloomsbury ink. Now you'll see when I do that second impression over the top, it's going to come out nice and dark. And this is what's going to create that guide for me to add my Copic coloring on top of. I'll just stamp that detail layer on all of my roses, and I like to kind of let it settle in and dry. You could come right in and do the rest of your Copic work, but I kind of like to let that ink settle. Now while I wait for that, I can come in and just pull some highlights out of these leaves the same way I did with the roses. I'm not going all over the whole leaf, just little areas, and everywhere I touch with that colorless blender, it's going to lift that color a little and create those highlights. And then I'm going to come in with that YG03 again and start adding in some midtones. I'm not going to cover the whole leaf. I'm actually just going to, I'm going to set up the base for the rest of the Copic coloring that I'm going to do eventually. You can see I'm starting at the stems and just adding a little bit of color to them. I'm darkening them up just a little. And again, I'm not going over the whole line again. I'm just hitting maybe the base a little bit underneath and then again at the base of the leaf itself. I kind of like to work these in stages, so I've got, to about the base layer laid down for that rose, and so I'm going to work all of the leaves until I get them to about the same completion. I don't want to, complete a rose all the way to the end and then complete the leaves all the way to the end. I like to have them at the same stage throughout the process. That way I can decide when I want to stop. For example, if I wanted to, I could stop right here, add my sentiment, and be done. But I'm going to show you how to take it a step further. So right now the rose looks kind of stylized, and I want to go for a more photorealistic look. So to do that, we need to soften up that edge where we've just stamped that detail layer. So we're going to take the colorless blender, and I'm going to use little flicking motions to break up that color where we stamped it. So I'm not going to go over the whole thing in a nice smooth line. I'm actually using little flicking motions to remove or lift some of the color in those stamped areas. Now this is, like I said, going to break up that color and give us a more realistic look and less of a stylized artsy look. And it's at about this point that you can really start to see that rose really taking shape. And then I did the exact same thing to the two smaller roses. Now, like I said, there's several stages at which you could stop with this. You could stop right here and this looks great. Add your sentiment and be done. But I'm going to show you how to add even more depth and dimension to this using our Copic markers. We're going to be using V12, V04, and V06. These work beautifully with the Bloomsbury color. So starting with the lightest V12, I'm going to go over all of the shadow areas and I'm going to start intensifying that the shadow. So where the petals would be deepest within the rose, I'm going to start using a flicking motion to add an even deeper shadow to the base of those petals. And I'm going to show you this at real time for a little bit, and then I'm going to go into fast motion so that you can see, how it all progresses and comes together. But basically what I'm doing is just further defining those shadows. And you can see here how beautifully these Copics blend with our dye inks. I mean, it looks like I've done this whole thing with Copic markers, but we cheated and we used the stamps as like a cheat sheet, almost like a guide. So, I didn't have to hand draw this rose. All of the basic shape and then all of the areas where the shadows should go, we created by using the stamps. So I'm going to go ahead and speed things up now, and I'm just going to repeat the same process on each petal. I'm going to go in and deepen up the base just to intensify that shadow. If I get an area too dark, I can just use the blender pen to lighten it up again. I'll keep working each one until I'm happy with where it's at, and then I can move on to adding an even darker shadow. Now I'm going to come in and do the same thing with the V04, except for this time I'm not going to do quite as much. I'm going to start deepening up the darkest areas, and then I'm going to use the V12 to kind of smooth and blend it out. I don't want it to be too harsh, and it's okay here and there to have a really deep shadow, but for the most part I want a smooth, gradual blend of color. So I'll lay down some V04 and then I'll use the V12 to just kind of blend it out so that it's softer. And again, I'm going to go into fast motion here, repeating that same process. This time I'm not going to come out as far. I'm going to stay closer to the very, very base of the petal. And the further away from the center I get, the less dark I'm going to make it. I'm even adding some darker shadows to the edges of the petals and not just at the base. This will just add some good variation. With the roses done, it's time to add some detail to these leaves, and for that we're using YG03 and YG63. So to create the suggestion of a rose leaf, I'm using YG63 to, I do the base and the center vein, and then I add a little flick at the tip. So I'm not drawing a complete line down the entire leaf. I'm just, again, doing the base and the tip. And then here and there, I'm going to suggest some veins running from the sides. Again, I'm not completely drawing a straight vein from the middle all the way out to the edge of the leaf. I'm just adding some dark spots where the veins would be. And then I'm going to come in with the YG03 and kind of smooth that out. I'm not going to go over the whole leaf because I don't want to cover up all my highlight shade. I do want to leave a couple of areas in the highlight. So from the dark line down, I'm going to blend that out, and I'm going to leave just a little area above that darkest line. I'm going to leave that the lightest color, and that's going to create kind of a highlight. So I'm going to show you in real time again on this other leaf, and then I'll go into fast motion. I'm going to darken up the base, and then I'm going to start hinting at some veins coming from the side to the middle. And then I'm going to come in with the YGO3, and I'm going to soften that out. Now, I'm not certified in Copic coloring. Heck, I don't even know how to say the word. Is it Copic or Copic? I've heard it both ways. I go with Copic because that's just how it naturally comes off my tongue. So Copic it is. But this way works for me, and I think that that's really all that matters. When you start using a certain medium, experiment with it. Find out what works for you. Just because somebody else says you must do it this way, that doesn't mean that's the way you should do it. Do what you're comfortable with and what works for you. Sometimes I like to lay down my shadows first and then come over top with my color. Sometimes I like to lay down my color first and then add my shadows. It just depends on what I'm working on and the actual subject. So play around with it. Have fun with it. You don't have to do it the exact same way that I'm showing you here. If you have another method that works, then go with it. That's what I really like about this method is the stamps are actually just kind of like our cheat sheet, and this really gives us the latitude to kind of flex our creative muscles. With all of our coloring done, now we just have to add our sentiment. And I am a firm believer, if I put a lot of time into coloring something, I am not cutting it up and I'm not covering it up. So I'm going to be using this big bold sentiment from Hand Lettered Hello, and we are just going to be stamping that in black ink. I think that this is a nice contrast to all of the vibrant color that we have going on the background. So I will just stamp that to the center here using my Fiskars stamp press because I want to make sure I get this on there right, and I am going to walk my fingers over it, make sure I get a nice even impression, because again, I don't want to mess this up. And then I'll add my sub-sentiment, also from Hand Lettered Hello. So I've taken that panel and cut it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to adhere that to the front of a standard 5 1/2 by 4 1/4 inch card base with some foam tape. I really don't think that you need to do too much else to these cards. All of the white space just really makes the coloring stand out. Now, I also promised you an easier way, a quicker way. So this actually uses the same method, but we're going to be less precise with our coloring. We're not going to do the whole card, but I'm going to show you how you can achieve these leaves and these types of roses quickly and easily. You'll start the same way you did before. We'll stamp our base images. This time we're using Miami Spice and Mojito again. And you will do the exact same method of lifting out your color to create some of those highlights and shadows using the Copic blender. Then we'll come in and we will add that detail layer on top using the exact same color. Now this time, instead of using the blender pen to remove color, we are going to use YR00 to blend out that heavier saturated second generation stamping into the first generation stamping. So we're going to go over everywhere we just stamped with the YR00 to kind of soften it out. Then I came in with YR02 and I'm going to add some deeper color. This time, instead of being really careful and dainty with our coloring, I'm just going to kind of scribble it on. I'm going in a back and forth motion this time. I am following each petal. I'm working in that clockwise spiral type motion. But I'm not being careful like I was last time to, really make sure that I stayed within the petal and all of that. I'm being much more loose, much more carefree with this one. My strokes are much less consistent and just freer. And it kind of gives that really stylized look that I really like right now. So, I mean, truth be told, this one is probably my favorite. And finally, we're going to add YR04. This is going to be our darkest color, and we're not going to use nearly as much of this one. We're just going to kind of tap, randomly hit some areas here. I'm using that same motion, just kind of that back and forth, working in that spiral motion. And I'm not hitting every petal with this one. Even in some places, I'm hitting the edge. Likewise, the leaves are also a lot more loose in style, so you'll just want to be a little more carefree with those so that they match the rose itself. I'll start off with the YG03 and then I'll add the YG63 to just further define some edges, add a little more contrast in that color so that it matches the rose. So as you can see, the results are quite different, and if you're just not a huge fan of coloring or you don't have the patience for it, then this is a great alternative, and I actually prefer this look over the other one. Although I do enjoy the coloring part, I find it very therapeutic. I love the look of this particular one. Another option would be to add more detail. You can add more shadow or more detail to the leaves. I mean, it just all depends on how much you enjoy coloring. So there you have a couple different ways to use your stamps as guides to create these really detailed images. I have enjoyed taking over for Jennifer today. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.
So it's Jennifer again, and I hope you enjoyed that video as much as I did. If you're interested in the products that Dawn used here, they're linked below in my YouTube description, or you can head over to my blog for much more information and links to some of my favorite cards and videos from Dawn. I will be back in a few days where I share a video using a technique inspired by what Dawn shared here today. I hope you'll stop back by and visit me over at jennifermcguireinc.com. Thanks so much for watching.